Lewis and Clark and the rest of the Corps of Discovery wintered in 1804 to 1805 near the Mandan villages in what would become North Dakota. During the winter, they met a French trader named Toussaint Charbonneau and one of his wives, Sacagawea. Lewis and Clark hired Charbonneau and Sacagawea to act as translators as they moved across the lands of Montana.
The other thing about Sacagawea is she's pregnant. And on February 11th of 1805, she's going to give birth to a son.
They don't say specifically in the journals where she was when she gave birth on February 11th, 1805, but we assume that she was within the fort because Lewis is talking about assisting in the birth.
She gives birth to a little baby, a healthy baby, Jean-Baptiste, they name him. Of course, he's later going to be known as Pomp. Well, William Clark's going to nickname him Pomp.
It's a little under 2 months later that they're leaving here to continue on the river westward, which is just, it's hard to imagine having such a little one traveling.
And what's really interesting about Pomp, too, is he's going to be the youngest member of the Corps of Discovery, and he's not going to remember one bit of the whole journey. In April of 1805, and the reason they're leaving a little bit earlier is because they heard rumors that the Teton Sioux are coming their way.
The French and the English and the Spanish, who had been here a long time, they were doing everything they could to kind of sabotage the Americans' effort.
Yeah, they had everybody chasing them. The viceroys down there in Mexico City sent a whole battalion up there and trying to find them. Almost got them. I mean, the first time I think they missed them by about a week.
There's that big middle chunk of the country. There's just not a whole lot of maps. And so it's like, we know the Pacific Ocean's over here. The Russians and British and Spanish have been out there. There's a big chunk in the middle that there's so little written about.
Lewis and Clark had maps that went to the Mandan villages that are at Bismarck, North Dakota. We knew that, but past that, there was nothing mapped.
Distance-wise, they had a really good idea of how far Mandan was to the coast. You know, they had been surveyed, they knew where the coastline was.
What is this big unknown beyond this point?
Once the expedition leaves the Mandan Hidatsa villages in North Dakota, there is virtually no contact with indigenous peoples as they make their way through the river country, the Missouri River country of Montana.
With the grasses, the Great Plains, it supports a level of wildlife that you don't see in the eastern forests, and that's really one of the things that the oohed and awed about the most. It was just the immense amount of wildlife, the bison, the elk, the antelope, the deer, and the bighorn sheep, all of it.
They're going to go by that big Yellowstone River dumping in there, really right there at the North Dakota line. And that Yellowstone River, the Hidatsas chirping in their ear about that, saying, why aren't you going there? True to the Jefferson's vision and desire, and that is stay on that Missouri to its headwaters, to the fountainhead.
For Lewis and Clark, the West is just so dramatically different than the eastern part of the country. And coming into Montana, you know, William Clark referred to this as the deserts of America.
You know, the sky was huge. They call it Big Sky Country there for a reason. It is huge. And this land is big. Most people, when they go to Montana, you know, you kind of have your ideas of what it looks like. And then you go there and you realize that it's totally bigger than what you imagined. They're going to go through the Missouri River breaks, which is some of the most desolate areas. I mean, it is absolutely bone dry in the summertime. It is rattlesnake, full of rattlesnakes. It is just not the place you want to be for very long. They did go through an area there that had big sculpted white canyon walls there, and Lewis actually almost gets nostalgic or romantic. I've been more romantic with that area, as he describes it.
We do suspect that their movements were probably observed by small groups of indigenous peoples as they were coming along the tops of the cliff areas. They're looking down and they're seeing these boats, which to them would have been very unusual, but they were not disturbed by it. They noticed very quickly that they were traveling with a woman.
For anybody seeing that, they would understand that this isn't a warring party coming to attack them, because you wouldn't travel with a woman and a child especially.
They're eventually going to wind up to a point where the river's going to fork. And this is a point they call decision point.
Once Lewis and Clark and the expedition come to the confluence of what we now know the Missouri, but then also the Marias River, there is some confusion. Which route do we go?
Lewis takes a squad of men and he goes on the North Fork, and Clark takes a squad of men and he goes on the South Fork. They go up these rivers, they check them out, and when they come back to a T, all the men say, it's the Northern Fork. That's the one it is.
That was a big pinch point, because by this point they had long gone past any help, any community. They hadn't met any of the tribes out here. They were just going on information that was shared with them.
Now they knew if they went the wrong direction, they're in trouble, because they knew it would be taking up a lot of their summertime. They only went up, maybe reconnoitered maybe 20, 30, 40 miles before they came back.
They kept trying to get everybody's ownership, and they wanted everybody's input with it too, because they knew that if there was mutiny, there was nothing they could do.
There are times where they asked the men, what do you think? What do you want? What do you want to do? What do you think is best? And to a T, every one of these men, including the riverman Pierre Crozat, he says definitely to the north is the way you want to go. And Lewis and Clark both say, no, it's the southern route. You're joining us. They said, we'll happily go wherever you want to go, Cap.
They basically stood their ground, but they still went out and scouted and made sure that the decision that they made eventually would be okay with everyone.
When you look at leadership on the Lewis and Clark Trail, this is the buy-in moment for me. This is when the men, to a T, the entire group shows that they're behind Lewis and Clark as their leaders.
For more information or to become involved with the Lewis and Clark Trail Alliance, visit lewisandclark.org. To learn more about Shenandoah University and the Shenandoah Center for Immersive Learning, visit su.edu/skill.